There is a law in Argentina so strange that the first time people hear about it, they think it's a joke. A law that allows the president of the nation to become the godfather of a family's seventh son. But that's not the most surprising part. What's truly incredible is the reason this tradition came into existence. And to understand it, we have to travel back more than 100 years, to a time when many people believed that a family's seventh son could turn into a werewolf. This is the true story behind the myth of the lobizón, and one of Argentina's most unusual traditions. For centuries, the number 7 has held a special place in the human imagination. There are 7 days in a week. The ancient world recognized 7 classical planets. There were the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Across many cultures, the number 7 symbolized perfection, destiny, and power. So it is no surprise that superstitions and legends grew around this number. In several European countries, people believed that the 7th son possessed extraordinary abilities. In parts of Ireland and Great Britain, it was said that he could become a healer. Elsewhere, people believed the exact opposite, that he was marked by a curse. And it was in Eastern Europe that one of the most unsettling versions of the legend emerged. According to the tale, the 7th son was destined to transform into a werewolf. In Slavic folklore, this creature was known as the Volkodlak, or Vukodlak. Over the centuries, this belief spread across different regions of the Russian Empire, and when thousands of European immigrants crossed the Atlantic to the Americas, they brought these stories with them. Among them were Enrique Brost and Apollonia Holman. The couple lived in the town of Coronel Pringles in Buenos Aires province, Argentina. In 1907, they welcomed their 7th consecutive son. For many people, it was simply a coincidence, but to them, it meant something far more serious. According to the traditions they had brought from Eastern Europe, the boy was at risk of being marked by the dreaded werewolf's curse. Faced with this situation, they made an unexpected decision. They wrote a letter to the then president of Argentina, José Figueroa Alcorta. They asked him to become their son's godfather. Their request was inspired by an old custom from Tsarist Russia, where it was believed that the Tsar's protection could break any curse associated with a family's 7th son. And then, something extraordinary happened. The president accepted. Without realizing it, he had just begun a tradition that would endure for more than a century. What started as an extraordinary gesture was repeated again and again. Over the years, countless Argentine families requested presidential godparenthood for their sons. The custom grew until it became part of the country's popular culture. Meanwhile, the legend continued to evolve. In Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, the figure of the lobizón began to spread. According to the folklore of the Rio de la Plata region, a family's 7th son could transform during the nights of the full moon. The story was passed down from one generation to the next. Although many regarded it as nothing more than a legend, in some rural communities the fear was very real. Historical records show that some children faced discrimination simply because they were the 7th consecutive child born into a family. For that very reason, many researchers believe that the presidential godparent tradition had a protective effect. The presidential sponsorship gave these children public recognition and helped eliminate prejudice. Decades later, the Argentine government decided to formally recognize the custom. In 1973, during the presidency of Juan Domingo Perón, Decree 848/1973 was signed. What had begun as a simple tradition was granted official recognition. It was later expanded to include seventh daughters as well. From that point on, any family with 7 consecutive children of the same sex could apply for presidential godparenthood. However, many people have misunderstood the measure. It is not a legal adoption. The president does not assume parental responsibilities. It is an honorary godparenthood. The recipients receive a commemorative medal and, depending on the regulations in force at different times, may also qualify for certain educational benefits or scholarships. The law continued to evolve over time. For decades, it was limited exclusively to Catholic families. But in 2009, the rules were changed to include citizens of all religions. That change allowed members of Jewish, Muslim, and other faith communities to receive the same recognition. One of the most well-known cases took place in 2015. That year, Yair Tawil became the first Jewish child to be recognized under this presidential tradition. The story attracted the attention of news outlets around the world. Many headlines claimed that Argentina had a law related to werewolves. The reality, however, was far more complex. Although the historical connection to the Lobisson myth is undeniable, the modern purpose of the law is entirely symbolic. There is no official belief in supernatural transformations. What remains alive is a cultural tradition that began more than a century ago. Even so, some historians have tried to downplay the connection between the law and the werewolf myth. Others argue that the two are inseparable. The truth is that historical documents, first-hand accounts and records from the time, show that superstition was a key factor in the origin of the tradition. And that is what makes this story so fascinating, because it shows how a simple folk legend can eventually influence a country's official institutions. Few myths ever leave such a lasting mark on reality. Today, more than a century after that letter was sent from Coronel Pringles, the tradition still exists. No one seriously fears anymore that a child will turn into a werewolf, but the story remains alive as a reminder of how beliefs, fears, and traditions can shape a society. And perhaps that is the most incredible part of this entire story, that behind what appears to be a law about werewolves lies a much more human lesson. The ability of a community to transform a superstition into a tool for protection and recognition. A true story, a real law, and one of the most curious cases in Latin America. If you enjoyed this documentary, please subscribe to discover more true stories, historical mysteries, and surprising curiosities that seem like fiction, but really happened.